Let's talk to our friend Will Chamberlain, who joins us once again. He's a senior counsel at the Article 3 Project. I encourage you to go to article3project.org and follow Will on X at Will Chamberlain. Will, welcome back. It's good to have you here.
Good to be with you, Ian.
Thank you. I want to know what your thoughts are, how this trial is going to end. Is he going to be found guilty, acquittal, hung jury, or a directed verdict like President Trump was kind of
I,
saying demanded there?
I don't know. I think there's a really good shot at an acquittal because I think it would take 12 people highly motivated to get Trump, regardless of what the law says, to convict him. Because the basic problem that the jury has is that they are absolutely reliant on the testimony of Michael Cohen to prove multiple elements of this crime, intent, both in terms of intent to commit the crime itself and intent to do so in furtherance of election issues. And it's only Michael Cohen's testimony. And Michael Cohen was absolutely shredded on cross-examination as a guy who basically has every form of bias you could possibly have and as little credibility as you could have. He's lied under oath repeatedly in the past. He has a financial motive for seeing Trump imprisoned. He has a personal revenge motive for seeing Trump imprisoned. And he even lied on the stand about something as simple as a phone call that he had with Trump's bodyguard. So I think that a reasonable juror would look at this and say, I can't convict this man based on this guy's words, so I have to acquit him.
We're speaking with Will Chamberlain with the Article 3 Project. I'm a little confused about the timeline here because my understanding is that closing arguments are going to happen, what is it, maybe next Tuesday, and then they could take Wednesday off. Is it just because the Memorial Day holiday is this weekend? Is this standard operating procedure to push out the rest of this trial this long? It kind of feels like they're milking it, but I don't really know what is standard.
I think it's not unheard of. Basically, the court has a reason for wanting the jury to hear the summations consecutively, and has some reason to think that the summations are going to take a while.
What does that mean, summations? Can you kind of break that down a little
Closing
bit?
arguments,
Closing
closing
arguments.
arguments.
Okay.
So that if the closing arguments are going to take a while, they don't want there to be a 3-day weekend between you hearing the prosecutor's story and the defense story, or forcing the defense to like stop midway through and wait 3 days before continuing. So it's not unheard of for a judge to do something like this.
So we'll get a few more days of news headlines and news cycle out of this story. The closing arguments will happen. You said that could take a few days. Is it possible by the end of next week that we do have a conclusion to this trial, or will it push past even the end of next week?
Could be by the end of next week, could be early the following week. I don't expect deliberations to take forever. I suspect that, although we could have a hung jury, so that could lead to deliberations taking a while because there might be just flat out disagreement among the jurors. But I don't expect this to take all that long. And yeah, we could have a verdict.
So my understanding is if you had one juror out of the 12 that was like, absolutely not, I'm not voting guilty, and another one that said he's 100% guilty, and that is the hung jury that we're talking about here, how long does the judge, or how long do they have to sit there to not agree before the hung jury is determined?
It's really up to the judge. It's a thing in the judge's discretion. The judge can make a decision about like if they think that further deliberation will bring them together, then they can push them to stay in deliberations. I don't know that there's a maximum time limit. I think it really is ultimately in the judge's discretion, but
Okay.
judge is human like everybody else and is going to recognize when something's intractable or something might be resolved.
Okay. Well, Chamberlain speaking with us right now. I want to ask you about the defense. They've decided to bring Costello on as a witness, was a lawyer to Michael Cohen. I've heard some legal thought saying that if the prosecution doesn't make the case for you to need to make a defense, then you shouldn't bring extra witnesses on that could potentially become problematic if it's an unforced error. And then we listened to Jonathan Turley, who recently said this is not your ordinary case. No standard operating procedure necessarily applies here because of all the absurdity that has gotten us this far. What did you think about the defense's decision to put Costello on the stand and how it turned out for them?
I think it went fine. They were trying to further undermine Cohen. They got constrained a lot by the judge, is my understanding, in terms of the kind of questions they were allowed to ask. And the judge was constantly sustaining objections. So I don't think that really helps. It doesn't help when the prosecution's having to get up and constantly object to a witness who is indicting their star witness. I think in the eyes of the jury, they'll be like, what are they hiding here? Why is the prosecution not willing to let this questioning happen?
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective.
So, again, it's a situation where, assuming that there are some jurors acting in good faith and trying to get to the truth of the matter, I don't think Costello could have possibly hurt them. And I don't think they're going to forget about. I mean, Cohen was on the stand for what, close to a week, something like that, ultimately, and they're not going to forget Cohen's testimony. They're going to have a view of Cohen, and I don't. Costello certainly isn't going to change that view one way or the other. He might swing somebody towards not believing him.
Mm. So when you've listened to a reaction to, I don't know how well versed you can be about a jury if you haven't witnessed them yourself, but we've heard a lot of firsthand accounts of people who have gone in there who have observed the jury. It seems like they've been reviewed as being very attentive, not super bored, paying attention. Any thoughts on the jury and what you've heard about them and how that might turn out?
I mean, it does sound like, from the reports I'm hearing from both left and right, that the jury is treating this like any other case, that in that respect. So they're listening to the testimony, they're reacting negatively when it's revealed that someone's lying. They're not just out to lunch having already made their decision. That's the vibe I'm getting. But again, I'm speaking as someone who hasn't even stepped inside that courtroom.
Sure.
So I'm relying totally on the sort of observations, that the very secondhand observations of the reporters in the room. But it sounds like they're actually they're taking the trial seriously, and listening carefully to what the witnesses are saying and judging their credibility.
We're speaking with Will Chamberlain of the Article 3 Project. You can follow him on X at Will Chamberlain, article3project.org. Obviously, we need to wait on the opinion of the court and the opinion of the jury to find out how this conclusion will come to be. But, you suggested that there is the possibility of acquittal. The court of public opinion, I mean, minds are going to blow if we get an acquittal out of this. And I'm also wondering about the implication of Michael Cohen, the revelation that he has stolen money directly from the Trump campaign. I'm just kind of wondering what you think the fallout of this trial might end up being.
I mean, I think the fallout of a conviction would be dramatic, in the sense of, I don't think there's a huge chunk of the public that just won't accept it. That enough has come out in the course of this trial that I don't think that conviction will be seen as legitimate by the public. So whatever Judge Merchan decides, I don't think it'll sway that many votes ultimately. There's been so much in the public about Michael Cohen being caught lying under oath, being a convicted perjurer, that I don't believe people will take that seriously. I think if he's acquitted, it will be an enormous tailwind for President Trump.
Do you
And really give him a lot of momentum, especially because none of the other trials or indictments against him are going anywhere, are getting resolved before the election. So basically the Democrats really thought they had this massive swarm lawfare attack that was guaranteed to get President Trump in jail before the election, and suddenly they realized, like, this is it, and this is easily the weakest on the merits of any of the charges against him.
Well, you're studied and practiced in the law. Does this hearten you? Does this give you confidence in the justice system that is in place, that even with some of the lawfare that has been applied, that it does feel like right now, with time, that a lot of this is resolving itself? There are great political implications, of course, in the timeline of how this is happening, but it does sort of feel, in the 30,000-foot view, like the justice system is shaking out justice, at least at this point.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, what's heartening is the Supreme Court's willingness to step in, but a lot of these things went a long way in the appellate system before somebody finally put a stop to it. I think perhaps the most embarrassing thing, and the thing that's really depressing, is people should go back and read the DC Circuit opinion on presidential immunity, and try and reconcile that with prior precedent. I mean, maybe you're not a lawyer, so you don't see the problem, but that DC Circuit opinion was trash. It was garbage. And not necessarily because of the result, but of the logic of that opinion. It said there is no such thing as immunity, because, and really you can depend on prosecutors to act in good faith 100% of the time, and there's no meaningful impingement on the executive branch. And not only is that just, on its face obviously wrong, but it's in contradiction to the most important relevant case in that area, which is Nixon v. Fitzgerald. And if Nixon v. Fitzgerald, all these similar arguments were made about civil liability, in the sense of, well, we don't want presidents to think they're above the law. And the Supreme Court said, no, 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 no. There's not going to be civil liability for presidents. They'd be sued into oblivion, and it would really impinge on how they would act as the executive branch we're totally not going to get involved. And then to read the DC Circuit opinion, it's like they just pretended that the Supreme Court hadn't said anything about this topic before. Not even that they tried to distinguish it; they almost just ignored it entirely. And it's an embarrassing opinion. And even if you actually listen to the Supreme Court's the argument on presidential immunity, at one point Roberts asks DOJ's lawyer, like, "Are you going to defend this opinion at all?" And the answer was effectively, "No, we know it was wrong. We're just hoping you still ultimately reach a result that helps us, but we're not going to defend that stuff." And that's the second highest court in the land that issued an opinion that was so garbage the DOJ itself wouldn't defend it. I mean, that's depressing.
Yeah. It does seem like the rot is deep. It maybe hasn't killed the whole thing, but it does need to be rectified, which what I'm hearing here is that these judges that are placed in these jurisdictions or circuits or whatever the appropriate term is, this is where the Senate is going to really come into play. And if everyone's going to talk about the presidential election, of course, Donald Trump being at the epicenter of this, but getting those judges approved and through is really important, can make a huge impact down the line to preserving and protecting our justice system.
Oh yeah, no, you can't. I mean, Democrats appoint justices that rule for Democrats in any political case. As a rule of thumb. I mean, there are exceptions, but I mean, reading that DC Circuit opinion, you sit there and think that this is embarrassing. I would have been embarrassed to put my name on that opinion.
Um,
Um,
Go ahead.
yeah.
Well,
So I think that that's one of the reasons. It's just yet another reason friends don't let friends vote for Democrats. The consequences of letting Democrats run things is not just who is sitting in the Oval Office, it's who staffs the entire executive branch and who gets appointed to every judicial position. So, if you have friends who lean conservative, but they're like, "Oh, I don't know about Donald Trump again. I'm really tired of him." Just tell them that's not who you're voting for. You're voting for a party, right? You're voting for you're basically voting for the 2,000 people who ultimately run our executive branch and our government.
wow.
And you don't want those people to be the staffers that Democrats will hire. You know what those people will be like.
Yeah, we know what they're capable of because they flexed even beyond their measure quite a bit. Last question for you, Will, before we let you go. The judge still needs to give directions to the jury, correct?
Yes.
So can you kind of explain that process from where the closing arguments will happen? The judge will give those directions. Just explain what's going to happen or what the possibilities are so people can really understand the timeline of what we're looking at here.
So basically, people understand that there is a criminal statute that says this is the conduct that is prohibited, right? The jury instructions phase is about how the judge translates that statute, that law, into basically a checklist or essentially a rules for the jury to follow in more plain language, and just more intuitive. So, but like there's a lot of finesse, and the judges can get that wrong. And if they instruct the jury incorrectly on the law, well, that's a legal error that can easily be reversed on appeal, because it means that the jury may have been finding somebody guilty of something incorrectly because they were instructed wrong about what the law was. So there's always debate about how the jury instructions are framed and to accurately translate that. So I think that's one of the reasons they're pushing summations out, is because there needs to be time for there to be motions practice and debate and argument on what the proper jury instructions are, before they can send the case to the jury itself.
Yeah, it kind of made me think of like the Secretary of State gets to pick the language for a referendum or something on a ballot, and the wording, which is why that position is important for people to pay attention to. But the wording and the positioning of the words themselves can actually affect the outcome. So Mershon will once again have the opportunity to put some fingerprints on this issue.
Yeah, no, he's put his thumb on the scale in an enormous number of ways in this trial. I think the most blatant and jarring of which is his refusal to have a legal expert explain the details of federal election law, which is not a simple area. So he refused to have an expert on the theory that, well, the judge is supposed to be the expert on the law, so we don't need any experts' testimony on legal matters. But he's let Michael Cohen testify about what is a federal elections violation, and then didn't sustain any objections to that because it's like, oh, that's just context. It's like, no, you're letting people. You won't have an expert in to tell us what effectual election law means, but you'll have this convicted perjurer with no expertise tell the jury that, oh yeah, this is an election crime. Like, no. That's that reversible error right there for sure.
It is comedy of errors so far, what we've seen. Well, then you heard it here first, folks. Will Chamberlain says there could possible acquittal coming. And I'm going to put a pin in that and keep looking at it, at least for a week, Will, and hope
Mhm.
that you are right on that. Thanks for being with us today. It's always good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Let's do it again.